Hello, everyone. This is a little bit different to some of the other podcasts I've done. I've been interviewing some amazing people over the last few months, and I thought for episode 20, especially because it aligned with Thanksgiving week, I just spend a few minutes kind of talking about a little bit more context about the podcast, my background, and what I'm trying to, I suppose, achieve with this podcast. So I mentioned over the couple different episodes that I had a bit of a kind of roundabout direction to ending up kind of focused on climate. I grew up partly on a farm in Ireland, partly upstate New York. Worked as a butcher, worked on farms, lots of different contexts, and I was actually originally going to become an academic philosopher, and so that was a lot of the my early kind of college days was around being a professor. Was fascinated by the idea of the leather elbow pads of the professor life, just doing thinking, lots and lots of thinking, and sometimes coming up with somewhat original ideas. I was never too original in my own kind of philosophical meanderings, but was all set to go kind of PhD track. Then I decided I wanted to kind of experience the non-academic world, and I started working down in London with a company called FactSet. FactSet was a very interesting experience. It's a company still around. It's actually a lot bigger than when I joined, and I was probably about employee 1,000, 1,200, kind of that kind of range. Had been around about 25 years, and it was a financial services company that was providing software and data solutions to investment managers, sovereign wealth funds, all those kind of people. And was quite happy in that for a long time. Did a lot of sales. Got to experience a certain type of life, which was very new to me. But it wasn't anything that I ever really got a huge amount of kind of fulfillment in. I was getting fulfillment in other parts of my life, family, friends, all that kind of thing. And then from there, went traveling, worked at a couple startups, founded a company with my brother. That's a story from another day, I guess. And in general, I've been working at really, really great companies. So I had a company called Respondent for a couple of years, had an amazing experience there, loved the people, loved the culture. But, starting kind of early 2019, climate was more and more nagging, kind of at the back of my head. It had always been there. I was never somebody who kind of doubted the veracity of the climate change claims. This is a real problem. But I was vaguely of the idea that somebody was going to solve it, and that somebody was never going to be me, or I was never going to be any part of any sort of solution. But I still had this kind of nagging kind of feeling about it. So I wanted to kind of educate myself a little bit better. It actually started with some podcasts from Ezra Klein. He started talking more and more about climate. I'm a big fan of his interview style. And so I started reading, and I read lots of books on climate. And there was one book in particular that had a pretty big impact, and that's The Uninhabitable Earth by David Wallace Wells. And that is a book that's pretty terrifying, and I definitely, I've read a lot of the kind of critiques of that book. It was just, for those who haven't read it, it's all about, we talk a lot about this 2-degree warming target, or trying to stay below this 2-degree warming by the end of the 21st century. But he kind of explores, what would it mean to hit 2 degrees, or 4 degrees, or 6 degrees, or even higher. And the kind of picture he paints is pretty horrific. These are, a world where countries like Australia potentially can't even be inhabited full-time by humans, and there's a load of terrifying elements that come out of that. And so after I read that book, it was around November of 2019, so basically a year ago, I just kind of sat there, just kind of doing its work behind the scenes, I guess. And then I decided so then I was going to a wedding. A friend of mine, Akash, was getting married to his lovely bride, Sam, and in Phuket, in Thailand. So destination wedding. And so myself, my wife Natalie, and our good friend Elijah, we flew into that wedding, had a great old time, then went on to Bangkok, joined by another couple of friends for New Year's. Just great time, hedonistic kind of travails, all that kind of thing. And after that, I was going to fly from Bangkok to London to Ireland, to Dublin, and then on to New York, and then back on to Mexico. And I was going to see some family in London. I was going to see some friends in London, some family in Ireland. Most of those flights I was on my own, and in particular I was on my own for the Bangkok to Europe flight. And I was just basically sitting during that flight. I was thinking, I actually really enjoy being on flights alone. I find it's some of my best kind of thinking time, because not that many distractions. Even the air is a bit kind of like dead to a certain extent, and so you're kind of forced to look inward. And so I was sitting on the flight, thinking away, and I kept coming back to the books around climate that I'd recently kind of read, in particular the Uninhabitable Earth. I started to kind of feel like a certain level of emotion, mostly anger initially. I was kind of getting pretty stressed. I was like in my airplane seat, being like, why is nobody I know working on climate? This is absolute nonsense. This is completely terrible. And we all kind of trick ourselves, right? We all play games with our own kind of emotions. We all hide from ourselves. But within a couple of minutes, started kind of feeling the cognitive dissonance that I was experiencing, like really, really strongly. It's like I was getting furious about other people's behavior when I was doing nothing in my own behavior to actually work on the problem or help the problem in any way, really. Recognizing cognitive dissonance is a terrifying thing, right? And we have to maintain a certain level of cognitive dissonance just to go around and live, right? There's so many problems in the world that we have to ignore a lot of them just, to get up in the morning and go around our day. But this is a problem that I really felt I couldn't really kind of avoid anymore. And so by the time I got off that flight, I visited a friend of mine just outside London. Then I took a bus back to the airport. And so as I was going along, I basically was starting to more and more decide emotionally that I wanted to actually be involved with climate in some way. And by the time I finished this kind of raft of flights a few days later, I basically sketched out the first idea of something in the climate world. And I suppose I'll say what the first idea was. So the first idea I had was coming out of my kind of financial type background, was to build an index of private climate companies. It's going to be called the Carbon Negative 100, and this list would be, it was going to be super difficult to get on this. And these were the 100 companies that had the highest likelihood of reaching a gigaton of carbon reduction, each company, which is about 1/30th of what the world commits every year. So I was thinking about this kind of carbon negative 100. I was like, okay, this is an idea, and I started thinking about ways to kind of bring that to market. Would this be a media play? Would this be something more akin to certification of some sort? Am I competing with MSCI and S&P in terms of formalized indices of some sort? Am I competing with Crunchbase? All these kind of things. And so that was the first idea I was sitting with, and I don't think that was a particularly good idea. I never ended up doing too much with it. But the fact that I came up with an idea in the climate space got me excited enough to commit to something specific, and that was a date. And so I committed to the date of St. Patrick's Day 2021. So March 17, 2021 was the day I was going to leave the job that I loved at Respondent and start a company in the climate space. And I gave myself, at this point, this was a 14-month lead time before I would leave my job. And I was like, okay, I'm just going to kind of casually learn about what the opportunities are within climate for the next kind of 14 months. And, then, so that's what I started doing, just kind of reading here and there, listening to more podcasts, just, ideas kind of percolating around in my head. And then we're in March and COVID becomes, real. All of a sudden, the world is upside down. We're having lockdown. Everybody listening to this has had their own, COVID experience, so I don't need to kind of go on about that too much. But in essence, COVID, I feel, flattened the world in a couple different ways. So it flattened future states that I think not just I, but a lot of other people could imagine. And so all of a sudden it felt that more at the edge, wild startup ideas in the climate space might actually be able to get engagement from potential co-founders, from potential investors, from potential clients, and marketplace, and then the market itself. I was like, all of a sudden, I was like, oh, like the world is obviously being harmed in such terrible degrees. But I was also like, okay, there might be big opportunities starting to arise here to tackle something that's even bigger than COVID, as bad and as horrific as it has been, which is all the different problems derived from climate change, which basically has issues across the entire world, across every sector, every country. And so it still takes a while, right? Like a lot of the elements to starting a company, I think, are emotional. There's a lot of very wealthy people who don't start companies. There's a lot of very poor people who do. So like the economic element is an important element, but it's not always the full story. A lot of it is kind of mentality and where you are, how you see yourself in the world and how you see your ability to impact the world. Yeah, so then I saw that respondent kind of end of March, and I also started reading a lot of sci-fi because I was struggling to frame the world we were in and the kind of the wildness of what was happening in terms of like my standard ways of looking at the world, the kind of structures that I thought of, and so lots of kind of weird and wonderful sci-fi really helped me kind of be like, oh, this thing is kind of like this thing, or this thing is kind of like this other kind of wild thing, and yeah, and then a couple of months passed. And I started just really, really thinking, and I started talking to some people about the problems they face within climate. I was pretty sector agnostic. I'd have a couple of chats, one or two chats a week. And then I had an idea for a podcast. I've been a big believer and lover of podcasts for a number of years. My wife laughs about how I listen chipmunks because I listen to everything at 3x speed. And actually, anybody listening to this right now, I probably talk pretty quickly. When I hear myself talk, when I re-listen to the podcasts, I'm always very, very rapid. And so apologies for those who do like the 3x speed world. But in essence, I decided to do the podcast first of all because I wanted to help people who were kind of specifically trying to start something and trying to move domains. And I know My Climate Journey is a great kind of podcast. I'm a big kind of fan of what's being done there. But I still felt that I wasn't fully kind of hearing myself, kind of general approach. And so, I decided to kind of start something. I used the kind of typical kind of lean startup methodology to get something up and running. I just basically just started it, very lo-fi. The first couple episodes, not the best in terms of audio quality, and reached out to a lot of people on LinkedIn who I thought had interesting kind of climate type companies. The first couple of people, Greg Mulholland and John Young in particular, huge debt of gratitude to them to being the first couple of people who I recorded episodes with. And I really appreciate people who take a chance on other people when they're starting. And so actually, anybody listening to this who needs a person to take a chance on them, if there's anything I can do for you, always feel free to shoot me a message through LinkedIn or Twitter or any other places I'm online. But yeah, I started the podcast and I was pretty kind of broad. I was kind of interested in talking to any people who had been a clean tech founder or kind of part of their kind of early team or kind of an executive in a team. And after a while, I started to kind of narrow it down. I talked to people in energy, I talked to people in advanced materials, but I kept being pulled more and more back into things like food, supply chain, circular economy, all of those kind of elements. And a lot of it comes back to growing up on a farm back in the day. I'd kind of not really engaged with that time in my life that often. I didn't ever dislike the time on the farm. I actually quite loved large parts of it. And it's definitely a very, very far away future state where I have a bit of a farm going myself. But it wasn't something that I had ever kind of thought of as at the intersection of all the technologies and the kind of startup stuff that I've been doing as well. So as I started talking to people in agriculture, food, etc., I started getting very, very excited about all the possibilities in that space. And the specific thing that excites me most is the possibility that agriculture is the first industry, really, that in the first sector that human beings ever came up with, I guess after shelter, or maybe in conjunction with shelter. We figured out how to scale the creation of food, right, to feed lots and lots of mouths. And it's been an up and down, bouncy journey. It hasn't always gone well. We've had mass famines. We've had types of industrialized agriculture that have been, net negative for the parts of the world that have engaged in that. But it's still something we'll always need. We always will need to consume food, and food, is a social act. It's obviously full of pleasure. It sustains us, and so I'm very passionate about bringing forward the stories of companies in the kind of food space. And so when I think about some of the recent podcasts, talking to people, everything from biotechnology, cellular meat, but then also like the packaging associated with different kinds of food products or consumables, right? Everything from packaging for people who have their morning coffee, different types of sparkling water, and so on. And then also like who is producing the food. I'm fascinated by stories by trying to reduce the amount of logistic miles that take for a local farmer to get their food to a local population. These very, very large and complex supply chains, and often those supply chains aren't really providing as much kind of goodness as they could to every part of that supply chain. And so I'm very passionate about finding and elevating the voices of people who are really bringing incredible new types of technology and new types of value to food, agriculture, circular economy, all those kind of elements. So yeah, a couple of minutes about the genesis of the podcast. It's been 20 episodes. As I kind of work on other startup ideas that I'm going to kind of launch myself, I'm going to hopefully continue doing the podcast. We've got I think, about to record a load of episodes, so we will definitely have content going up until February or March. And yeah, and so I really appreciate everybody who takes their time every week to kind of listen. And yeah, apologies again for if I talk too quick. I am working on trying to reduce that speed. And yeah, those who are in the US, have a great Thanksgiving.